The grand gifting ceremony of the Crimson Scale was, by every measurable standard, the most prestigious event on the planet Valorith. It happened once every 70 cycles. The Brood Mother, an ancient, colossal dragon whose scales shimmered like molten copper set against a sunset, would present her clutch of hatchlings to the allied civilizations of the known systems. And those civilizations would bring gifts, offerings, tokens of respect, alliance, and goodwill meant to honor the newest generation of dragonkind. The gifts were always extraordinary. The Teochin Consortium, a collective of crystalline beings from the frozen moon of Pyrexia, had once gifted a throne carved from a single diamond the size of a small moon, threaded with gravitational threads that made it float eternally. The broodmother had acknowledged it with a dignified nod. The hatchlings had glanced at it once, then returned to gnawing on a charred bone. The Sylvanthi, those elegant plant-based entities from the emerald world of Greenhillow, had woven living gardens that bloomed in response to dragon breath, each flower singing a different harmonic frequency. Beautiful, breathtaking. The hatchlings had knocked them over within an hour, chasing each other through the wreckage with shrieks of delight that had nothing to do with botanical genius. The Kathori, those formidable war creatures from the deep caverns of Goreth, had once presented weapons forged in the hearts of dying stars. Ceremonial blades that could slice through the hull of a capital ship. The broodmother had placed them in her vault with appropriate reverence. The hatchlings had been terrified of the humming energy and hidden behind their mother's tail. And yet every 70 cycles the civilizations came, they brought their best, their most valuable, their most rare and precious creations, because dragon favor was not a small thing. A single word of approval from the broodmother could shift trade routes, open borders, and secure alliances that lasted centuries. To be chosen as a favored ally of the dragons was to be untouchable. So when the call went out across the systems that the Crimson Scale's newest clutch had hatched, 7 hatchlings, the largest brood in recorded history, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Delegations from 47 civilizations began preparing their gifts. 47, not 48, because no one expected humanity to come. Marcus Cole sat in the cramped mess hall of the human outpost on Valorith's 4th moon, staring at the notice on his datapad like it might bite him. Grand GIFTING ceremony. Official invitation extended to all recognized CIVILIZATONS. He snorted. Recognized? That was a generous word for it. Humanity had been part of the interstellar community for barely 12 standard years. They had one outpost on one moon. They had a population on Valorith that could fit in a mid-sized stadium back on Earth. They had no trade agreements worth mentioning, no military presence to speak of, no technological marvels that made other species stop and stare. What they had was a reputation for being stubborn, loud, oddly emotional, and generally considered harmless in the grand political machinery of the galaxy. The Teochin didn't take them seriously. The Sylvanthi found them charming in the way one finds a stray kitten charming briefly from a distance. The Kathori barely acknowledged their existence. And the dragons, well, the dragons were polite, diplomatic. The broodmother had once, during a territorial review, referred to humans as an interesting small flame, which was apparently high praise from a dragon but translated roughly to "they're cute when they try." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. The problem was that the invitation was real. It had been verified, confirmed through 3 different diplomatic channels. Humanity was expected to attend, to present a gift, to stand before the most powerful beings in known space and offer something worthy of 7 newborn dragons. He looked around the mess hall. It was a repurposed cargo container with flickering lights and a coffee machine that only worked when you hit it at exactly the right angle. The walls were decorated with printed photographs, mountains, oceans, city skylines, dogs, children playing, and sprinklers. Little pieces of home pinned up by a crew of 200 humans who were collectively as wealthy as a single mid-tier Teochin merchant. "What are we going to do?" he muttered. "That's a good question," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned. Lieutenant Commander Priya Sharma stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. She was the highest-ranking human on the moon, which, given the size of their operation, meant she was also the lowest-ranking human on the moon. She was everyone's boss and everyone's subordinate simultaneously. "Has anyone figured out what we're bringing?" she asked. The engineering team suggested we forge something, a tool maybe, something functional. "Dragons don't need tools, Marcus." The science division offered to compile a database of human knowledge. The broodmother has access to the collected archives of 47 civilizations. She could learn to build a fusion reactor in an afternoon if she wanted to. She doesn't want to. Marcus sighed. Someone in logistics said we could offer a year of free labor, construction, infrastructure, whatever they need. Priya's expression didn't change, which was somehow worse than if she'd scowled. You want to walk into the grand gifting ceremony, where the Kathori are bringing star-forged weapons and the Sylvanthi are bringing living art, and offer to do chores. When she put it that way, it sounded terrible, because it was terrible. We have nothing, Marcus said quietly. The words sat heavy in the air between them. Priya, you know we have nothing. We barely have enough to keep this outpost running. We can't compete with. I know. Then why are we goings? Priya was quiet for a long moment. She walked over to the wall of photographs. She reached out and touched one, a picture of a little girl, maybe 4 years old, laughing as she chased a butterfly through a sunlit meadow. Grass stains on her knees, dirt on her cheeks. Pure, uncomplicated joy frozen in a rectangle of pixels. Because we were invited, she said softly. And because sometimes showing up is the only thing you can do, even when you have nothing. Marcus stared at the photograph. The girl was Priya's daughter back on Earth. She'd been 3 when Priya left for Valorith. The photo was 6 months old, relayed through 3 relay stations and compressed to hell, but Priya had printed it anyway and pinned it up like it was made of gold. Maybe Marcus thought it was. The days before the ceremony were a blur of anxiety, arguments, and increasingly desperate brainstorming sessions. The crew debated for hours, days. They went through every possible idea and discarded each one. They couldn't offer technology, everything humanity had, the other species had better versions of. They couldn't offer resources. Humanity's resource extraction on Valorith was minimal, and what they did extract was needed for their own survival. They couldn't offer military strength. Humanity's one patrol ship, the Hopeful, was a retrofitted cargo vessel with weapons that wouldn't scratch a dragon's scales. They couldn't offer art, at least not in any form the other species would recognize as valuable. Human paintings, sculptures, and music were considered pleasant enough by galactic standards, but not remarkable. The Sylvanthi alone produced art that made human masters look like finger-painting toddlers. They couldn't offer knowledge, already covered, already dismissed. They couldn't offer land, they didn't own any. The outpost was leased from the Valorith Planetary Council, and that lease was tenuous at best. One by one, every avenue was explored and found wanting. On the 3rd night before the ceremony, Marcus sat alone in the outpost's tiny fabrication shop. It was the smallest room on the base, barely bigger than a closet, filled with a 3D printer that was older than most of the crew, a soldering iron and scraps of material that were too small or too degraded to be useful for anything important. He was supposed to be sleeping. Instead, he was holding a small piece of wood. Not even real wood, synthetic, a byproduct of one of the outpost's recycling processes. It had a grain pattern that vaguely resembled oak if you squinted and were feeling generous. It was, by any objective measure, worthless. His grandmother had whittled. He remembered that suddenly, vividly, the way memories sometimes crash into you without warning. She'd sit on her porch in the evenings, a pocket knife in her weathered hands, and she'd turn sticks into things. Little animals, mostly. A rabbit with one ear slightly longer than the other because she'd gotten distracted halfway through. A bird with wings spread wide, every feather individually carved with a patience that seemed to young Marcus almost supernatural. He'd asked her once why she bothered. They were just sticks. They weren't worth anything. She'd looked at him with those calm, clear eyes and said, "Worth isn't the same as meaning, sweetheart." He'd been 8, he hadn't understood. He was 36 now, sitting in a tin can on a moon 1,000 light years from that porch, and he still wasn't sure he understood. But something about the memory settled into his chest and refused to leave. Marcus picked up the soldering iron, then he put it down. He picked up a small file instead. He began to shape the wood. He didn't have a plan, he didn't have a design, he just carved, the way his grandmother had, slowly, carefully, letting the material tell him what it wanted to be. An hour passed then too. By midnight he had a small dragon, rough, uneven, one eye slightly bigger than the other like his grandmother's rabbit. The wings were too thick, the tail was crooked, and if you looked at it in harsh light, it was clearly the work of an amateur with inadequate tools. But there was something in it, something in the curve of the neck, the tilt of the head, the way the tiny claws gripped an invisible perch. It looked alive, not realistic, not even close, but alive in the way a child's drawing of a dog is alive, full of intention, full of the particular kind of care that only comes when the person making something isn't thinking about value at all. Marcus stared at it for a long time. It was worthless. He made 6 more. The morning of the ceremony arrived with the kind of crisp, golden light that made Valorith's 4th moon look like it had been painted by someone trying too hard. The sky was a deep amber, streaked with wisps of cloud that caught the light of the system's star and turned it into something almost holy. The human delegation gathered at the landing pad. There were 12 of them, That was all they could spare: 12 humans in their standard-issue jumpsuits, which were clean but faded from too many wash cycles. No ceremonial robes, no ornate armor, no jeweled accessories, just 12 people in blue-gray fabric standing next to a shuttle that had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. Marcus stood among them, a small cloth bag clutched in his hands. Priya, standing at the front, did a final check. Everyone remember the protocol: no sudden movements near the hatchlings, no loud noises, no direct eye contact with the brood mother unless she initiates, bow when addressed, speak only when spoken to. Got it, said Ensign Tamaz Reyes, the youngest member of the delegation at 22. He was trying to sound confident and failing completely. Don't embarrass the species, no pressure. No pressure, Priya agreed. She paused, then she turned to Marcus. What's in the bag? Marcus opened it slightly. Priya looked inside. She saw 7 small wooden dragons, each one slightly different, each one imperfect, each one radiating the unmistakable energy of something made by hand at 3 in the morning by a man who should have been sleeping. Priya didn't say anything for a long time. Marcus, I know. The Tiachin are bringing a sculpture made of compressed neutron matter. I know. The Sylvanthi are bringing a forest that grows memories. I know. The Kathori are bringing. I know, Priya, his voice cracked slightly. I know what everyone else is bringing, I know what this looks like, but I didn't have anything else, and I couldn't show up with nothing. Not when she. He stopped, swallowed. Not when they're Bobbies, he finished quietly. Priya looked at him for a long, searching moment, then she reached out and squeezed his shoulder, hard. They're going to love them, she said. Marcus blinked. What? The hatchlings, they're going to love them. You don't know that. No, Priya said, but I know human children, and I know my daughter would go absolutely feral for one of these. She tapped the nearest wooden dragon with one finger. Sometimes the thing that matters isn't what it's made of, it's what it means. Marcus wanted to believe her. He wanted to so badly that it physically hurt. He closed the bags. They boarded the shuttle. The ceremony took place in the Cradle of Flames, a vast open amphitheater carved into the side of a mountain by the dragons themselves eons ago. The stone was black and smooth, shot through with veins of something that glowed faintly orange like embers buried deep in ash. The amphitheater was enormous, capable of holding thousands, but it felt intimate because of the way the curves of the stone embraced the central space. At the center of the amphitheater was a nest. Not a nest in the bird sense. This was a sprawling, shallow depression in the stone, lined with something that looked like woven metal and crystal, warm to the touch even from a distance. It was roughly the size of a small lake. And in it, 7 dragon hatchlings tumbled, wrestled, and chirped at each other in voices that sounded like wind chimes made of bells and fire. They were small by dragon standards. Each was about the size of a large dog, with scales that shifted between deep crimson and bright copper depending on how the light hit them. Their wings were stubby and folded against their backs, too small yet for flight. Their eyes were enormous, too big for their faces, like puppies or kittens or every baby creature that had ever existed. They had stubby tails that they tripped over and tiny claws that they hadn't learned to retract yet, so every step they took clicked and scraped against the crystal lining of the nest. They were, objectively, the most adorable things Marcus had ever seen in his entire life. He had to physically restrain himself from making a sound. Around the nest, in a raised arc of stone seats, sat the delegations. The Tiachin were resplendent in their crystalline forms, refracting light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The Sylvanthi had grown temporary bodies for the occasion, tall, graceful figures made of woven flowers and living vines, each one a unique masterpiece of botanical engineering. The Kathori loomed in their dark, angular armor, faces hidden behind featureless masks, radiating the particular kind of silent menace that was their species' default setting. And then there were the humans, 12 people in faded jumpsuits, sitting in a cluster at the end of the arc, trying very hard to look like they belonged. Behind the nest, coiled around the upper reaches of the amphitheater like a living mountain, was the broodmother. Her name was Valixara the Ever-Burning, and she was enormous. Her body filled the space behind and above the amphitheater, scales the color of deep copper and darker rust, each one the size of a ground vehicle. Her eyes, 2 vast slitted furnaces of amber light, watched the proceedings with a calm, ancient intelligence that made every being in the amphitheater feel simultaneously safe and very, very small. Her tail, thicker than the human shuttle, curled around the stone behind her. Her wings, folded against her flanks, were each large enough to shade a city block. When she breathed, the air in the amphitheater warmed by several degrees, and the ember veins in the stone pulsed brighter. She was terrifying, she was magnificent, she was everything a dragon should be. And currently, one of her hatchlings was chewing on her tail with enthusiastic disregard for the fact that it was attached to a being that could level a mountain. Valixara did not seem bothered. If anything, there was a faint rumble, almost too low to hear, more felt than perceived, that might have been amusement. The ceremony began. One by one, the delegations rose and presented their gifts. The Tiachin went first, as was their right as the eldest alliance. Their representative, a being of pure crystal who spoke in tones that resonated in the bones, presented a sculpture. It hovered above an outstretched palm, rotating slowly. It was made of compressed neutron matter, rendered visible through a lattice of crystalline energy that held the impossibly dense material in a stable configuration. It depicted two dragons in flight, their forms captured in perfect mathematical precision. Every scale was identical, every angle was exact. It was, by any technical measure, flawless. The broodmother examined it. "A worthy craft," she said, and her voice was like a warm wind through a canyon. "Your mastery of matter remains unmatched. I accept this gift with gratitude." The sculpture was placed in a receiving alcove. The hatchlings did not look at it. They were too busy trying to bite each other's tails. The Sylvanthi went next. Their representative, a figure of blooming jasmine and silverbark, knelt before the nest and placed a seed on the crystal lining. The seed split open immediately, and from it grew a tree, but not a normal tree. This tree grew memories. Its branches bore leaves that, when touched, projected holographic images of ancient forests, forgotten rivers, the first sunrise on Greenhollow. Its bark sang in harmonics that made the air taste like spring rain. Its roots spread across the nest floor, warm and soft, creating a carpet of living moss that would cushion the hatchlings as they grew. It was extraordinary. Several of the other delegations murmured in appreciation. Even the Cathori masks turned slightly toward it. The broodmother lowered her enormous head, and her breath swept over the tree, making its leaves shimmer. "The Sylvanthi gift as always with their hearts. This tree will shelter my young, and they will know the beauty of your world through it. I am honored." The tree settled into the nest, its roots threading through the crystal lining. One of the hatchlings noticed it, padded over, and promptly tried to eat a leaf. The leaf projected an image of a waterfall directly into the hatchling's face. The hatchling sneezed, a tiny burst of flame that singed the leaf, and went back to wrestling. The Cathori presented their star-forged blades. 7 of them, one for each hatchling, each inscribed with protective wards in the Cathori war language. The blades hummed with barely contained stellar energy. They were beautiful in a terrible, dangerous way, the kind of beauty that reminded you that the universe was vast and indifferent and could destroy you without effort. The broodmother accepted them with appropriate gravity. "The strength of Gorath is legendary. My children will carry these blades when they are grown, and they will know that the Cathori stand with dragonkind." The blades were placed in a vault carved into the amphitheater wall. The hatchlings, sensing the hum of energy from the blades, retreated to the far side of the nest and hid behind their mother's nearest claw. And so it went. Civilization after civilization rose, presented their gifts, and received the broodmother's acknowledgement. Precious metals from the Murdani, a working model of a binary star system from the Astrathi, a cloak woven from captured light, soft as silk and warm as sunlight, from the Luminari, a living mechanical companion crafted from self-repairing alloys designed to serve as a guardian and teacher for the young dragons, from the Vexari. Each gift was a marvel. Each was irreplaceable. Each represented the best that civilization had to offer: resources, knowledge, art, and power distilled into a single offering. And with each presentation, Marcus felt the weight in his chest grow heavier. He looked down at the cloth bag in his lap. Inside it, 7 small wooden dragons sat in the darkness, worthless, insignificant, children's toys made from recycled material by a man who wasn't even good at carving. Beside him, he felt the crew shift uncomfortably. They could feel it too, the growing impossibility of what they were about to do, the gap between what they had and what was expected. The sheer, humiliating audacity of standing up after the Vexari had presented a sentient mechanical guardian and offering wooden figurines. Ensign Reyes leaned over. "Marcus," he whispered, "we don't have to do this. We can say we forgot, or that there was a malfunction, or..." "If we don't present a gift, it's worse than presenting a bad one," Marcus whispered back. "It means we didn't care enough to try." "But this is..." "I know what it is." The Vexari sat down to polite applause. The broodmother turned her enormous, amber eyes toward the human delegation. There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens in a crowded room when someone unexpected stands up. Every being in the amphitheater turned to look. 12 humans in faded jumpsuits. Marcus stood. His legs felt like they were made of someone else's muscles, shaky, unreliable, barely functional. He walked to the center of the amphitheater, and every step echoed off the black stone like a heartbeat. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. The crystalline gaze of the Teochin, the silent appraisal of the Cathori, the gentle, pitying attention of the Sylvanthi. And above it all, the vast, furnace-bright eyes of Valixara, the ever-burning. Marcus stopped before the nest. Up close, the hatchlings were even more impossibly cute. 3 of them had paused their wrestling to look at him with those enormous eyes. One was sitting on its haunches, head tilted, staring at him with an expression that could only be described as curiosity. Another was hanging off the edge of the nest by its front claws, hind legs kicking in the air, clearly stuck and refusing to ask for help. Marcus took a breath, then another. His hands were shaking. His voice came out as a croak. He cleared his throat, started again. I'm Marcus Cole, I represent humanity. The words felt absurd. He represented humanity, him, a man who couldn't afford a real jumpsuit standing in a stadium carved by gods about to offer sticks to baby dragons. We're new here to the galaxy, to all of this we don't have much. We don't have neutron matter or living forests or star-forged blades. We don't have ancient arts or unmatched sciences or the resources of 1,000 worlds. He could hear whispers from the delegations. Not cruel exactly, but aware. The particular kind of whisper that says, yes, we know, why are you reminding us? Marcus opened the bag. What we have, he said, and his voice steadied slightly because he wasn't talking to the delegations anymore. He was talking to the nest, to the 7 small creatures who were watching him with the unfiltered attention that only the very young can give, is us. Our hands, our time, our imperfect, clumsy, ridiculous attempt to care. He reached into the bag and pulled out the first wooden dragon. It was the one he'd made first, the roughest, the most uneven, one eye bigger than the other, wings too thick, tail crooked. In the amber light of the cradle of flames, the synthetic wood looked dull and cheap. Next to the neutron matter sculpture in its alcove, it looked like garbage. Marcus held it out over the nest. I made these, he said, with my hands, one for each of you. They're not good, they're not valuable, the material is worthless. The craftsmanship is, he laughed, and it came out slightly strangled. My grandmother could have done better, and she made hers out of sticks she found in her yard. The hatchling that had been sitting on its haunches, the curious one, stood up. It padded across the nest floor on oversized, clumsy feet, each step clicking against the crystal. It stopped directly below Marcus's outstretched hand and looked up at the wooden figurine. Marcus held his breath. The hatchling reared up on its hind legs, stretching its stubby neck, and very gently sniffed the wooden dragon. Then it made a sound. It was a chirp, high-pitched, rapid, the dragon equivalent of an excited bark. The hatchling's enormous eyes went wide, and it bounced on its front feet, and it chirped again, louder this time, and the sound bounced off the stone walls of the amphitheater and echoed back multiplied. And then it breathed. A tiny puff of flame, barely a whisper of heat, more like a warm glow, washed over the wooden dragon. And something happened. The synthetic wood began to change. Marcus stared. The dull, cheap material was warming, darkening, taking on a richness that hadn't been there before. The grain deepened. The surface gleamed. The rough edges smoothed, not erased but softened, as if the flame was finishing what Marcus's clumsy hands had started. The wooden dragon now looked like it had been carved from the heart of an ancient tree, stained by decades of sun and rain, polished by years of being held and loved. It was still imperfect. One eye was still bigger than the other, the wings were still too thick, the tail was still crooked. But now it looked like those imperfections were on purpose, like they were character, not failure, like they were the fingerprints of the person who had made it, baked into the wood by dragon fire. The hatchling grabbed the figurine in its tiny claws, tucked it against its chest like a treasure, and curled around it with a rumble of pure contentment. The other 6 hatchlings went absolutely insane. Marcus barely had time to react. Suddenly there were 6 baby dragons swarming the edge of the nest below him, climbing over each other, chirping and squealing and flapping their stubby wings, all of them reaching up toward him with their little claws. He pulled out the second figurine and held it over the nest. A hatchling launched itself upward. A clumsy, graceless leap that shouldn't have worked snatched it out of his fingers and landed in a tangle of limbs and wings on the nest floor. It immediately started gnawing on the wooden dragon's tail with evident satisfaction. The third figurine, a hatchling, caught it midair. The fourth, 2 hatchlings fought over it, a brief, hilarious tussle of hissing and tail-thwacking that ended when Marcus hastily pulled out the 5th and 6th, distracting them into separate corners. The 7th figurine, the last one, the one he'd made at 4 in the morning when he was half delirious and running entirely on coffee and stubbornness, went to the hatchling that had been stuck hanging off the edge of the nest. It had finally given up and fallen on its back, and it lay there upside down, clutching the wooden dragon with all 4 claws, chirping at the ceiling in what could only be described as bliss. The amphitheater was silent. Not the respectful silence that had greeted the Teochin sculpture or the admiring silence that had greeted the Sylvanthi tree. This was a different kind of silence, A confused one, a what just happened silence. Marcus stood at the edge of the nest, empty bag in his hands, and watched as 7 dragon hatchlings curled around their wooden figurines with the single-minded devotion of creatures who had found exactly what they wanted and had no intention of ever letting go. One of them, the first one, the curious one, was making a sound that Marcus had never heard before. A low, rhythmic rumble, like a purr but deeper, resonant, warm. The wooden dragon was clutched against its chest, and every few seconds it would lift its head, look at the figurine, chirp softly, and then tuck it back in and resume purring. The others were doing similar things. Gnawing, cuddling, arranging and rearranging their grip to find the perfect angle. One had fallen asleep on top of its figurine, a tiny curl of smoke rising from its nostrils as it snored. In the receiving alcove, the neutron matter sculpture rotated in its lattice of crystal energy. Flawless, perfect, unnoticed. On the nest floor, the Sylvanthe memory tree grew its beautiful holographic leaves, unmolested, also unnoticed. In the vault, 7 star-forged blades hummed with the fury of dying stars. The hatchlings had forgotten they existed. Marcus became aware very slowly that Valixara had moved. The broodmother's enormous head had descended from the upper reaches of the amphitheater. It now rested on the stone floor of the arena, close enough that Marcus could have walked to her snout in a few steps. Her eyes, each one larger than Marcus's entire body, were fixed on him with an intensity that made his knees want to buckle. But it wasn't a threatening intensity, it was something else, something he couldn't name. "You carved these," she said, "not a question." Marcus swallowed, "Yes." "With your own hands." "Oh, yes." "From material that has no value." "Oh, yes." "And you knew when you stood before this assembly, you knew what the others had brought." Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper, "Yes." Valixara was quiet for a moment that stretched like taffy. The ember veins in the stone pulsed around them, synchronized with her breathing. "Tell me about the first one," she said, "the one Valith took." Marcus blinked. Valith. The hatchling had a name. Of course it had a name. They all had names. He looked at the first hatchling, Valith, still curled around the wooden dragon with that deep, resonant purr. I made it first," Marcus said. "It's the worst one, the most uneven. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I was just letting the shape happen. I thought about how my grandmother used to carve when I was a boy. She made little animals. They weren't good either, not by any real standard, but I loved them. I kept every single one. I still have them back on Earth in a box under my bed. And I thought me." He stopped, his eyes were burning, he blinked hard. "I thought maybe the thing that made them valuable wasn't what they were made of," he finished. "It was that she made them for me, with her hands, with her time, with whatever she had even when she didn't have much either." The amphitheater was so quiet that Marcus could hear the tiny sounds of the hatchlings breathing, could hear the soft click of claws against crystal as they shifted in their sleep, could hear the distant hum of the star-forged blades in the vault, still singing their songs of power to an empty room. Valixara's eyes narrowed, not in anger, in something that looked impossibly like recognition. "The Tiachin's gift is perfect," she said. "It will endure for eons. It will never degrade, never change, never diminish. It is a monument to their skill." She paused. "My children looked at it once. The Sylvanthe's gift is beautiful. It will grow and change and fill this nest with wonder. It is a testament to their art." Another pause. "My children tried to eat it. The Cathori's gift is powerful. It will protect my children when they are grown and facing the dangers of the world. It is a promise of strength." A pause longer this time. "My children are afraid of it." Valixara lowered her head further, until her snout was close enough to Marcus that he could feel the heat radiating from her nostrils, could see the individual scales around her eyes, each one a masterwork of natural engineering, could smell the ancient, smoky scent of her breath. "But your gift," she said, and her voice was so low it was nearly a whisper that stirred the air and made the ember veins flare. "Your gift is held against their hearts. Your gift is what they chose. Your gift, imperfect, clumsy, worthless, is what they reached for when they had everything else to choose from." Marcus couldn't speak. His throat had closed entirely. His eyes were overflowing and he didn't care. He didn't care about the delegations or the protocols or the dignity of the moment. He just stood there, crying silently in front of the largest creature he had ever seen, while her bobbies cuddled wooden toys he'd made in a closet. "Do you know why?" Valixara asked. Marcus shook his head. The broodmother's eyes, ancient, vast, filled with a wisdom that spanned millennia, softened in a way that Marcus would never have believed possible if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. "Because your gift has something in it that the others do not," she said. The Teochin sculpted with precision, the Sylvanthi grew with intention, the Cathori forged with purpose. All of these are worthy approaches, but you, human, you carved with love. The word hung in the air like a struck bell. I have lived for 11,000 years, Valixara continued. I have seen civilizations rise and fall. I have received gifts from beings of such power and knowledge that your mind could not comprehend them. And in all that time, I have learned one thing that matters more than any other. She pulled back slightly, and her gaze swept over the nest. Over her 7 children, each one curled around a wooden dragon, each one radiating contentment in the way that only a creature that feels completely safe can radiate. The young do not care about perfection, she said. They do not care about value or rarity or power. They care about warmth. They care about the thing that was made for them specifically, personally, with hands that shook because the maker wanted to get it right even though they knew they couldn't. They can feel that, Marcus Cole. They can feel the intention soaked into the material. They can feel the hours you spent. They can feel the love. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. It didn't help. I didn't think, he started. No, Valixara agreed gently. You didn't think, you felt, and that is why they love your gift, because it is the only gift here that was made for them, not for their mother, not for the alliance, not for the political weight of dragon favor. For them. 7 small creatures you have never met, who you will likely never see again, who you stayed up all night carving for because you couldn't bear the thought of showing up with nothing. She pulled back to her full height, that impossible mountain-filling height, and when she spoke again, her voice carried to every corner of the amphitheater, to every delegation, to every being who had come to offer their best and most valuable things. Humanity brings a gift of the heart, she announced, and my children have accepted it. This is not a small thing. This is the most important thing. The silence that followed was different from any silence that had come before. It was the silence of 47 civilizations simultaneously realizing something they had not expected to realize. The Teochin delegate turned its crystalline head and looked at the neutron matter sculpture. Beautiful, perfect, cold. The Sylvanthi representative gazed at the memory tree, magnificent, living, admirable. And then they both looked at the nest, where 7 dragon hatchlings slept in a pile of wings and tails and tiny claws, each one clutching a lopsided wooden dragon carved from worthless synthetic material by a shaking human hand in the middle of the night. The Cathori delegate, behind its featureless mask, did something that no one in the amphitheater had ever seen a Cathori do. It reached up and touched its mask, just for a moment, just a brief, almost imperceptible press of fingers against the surface where a face would be. It was the Cathori equivalent of putting a hand over one's heart. After the ceremony, as the delegations filed out of the amphitheater and made their way to the landing pads, Marcus found himself standing alone at the edge of the nest. The human delegation had moved ahead, Priya giving him a look that said take your time, and the amphitheater was emptying. The hatchlings were asleep, all 7 of them in a tangled heap of crimson scales and stubby wings, each one still holding their wooden dragon. The fire-blessed wood glowed faintly in the amber light, warm and alive, transformed by dragon breath into something that was no longer worthless because it had been chosen, because it had been loved. Marcus Cole. He turned. Valixara's voice came from above, soft and low, meant only for him. Oh yes. There is something you should know about dragon fire. He looked up at her. Her enormous eyes were half-lidded, drowsy in the way of a mother watching her children sleep. Our fire does not simply transform matter, she said. It reveals what is already there. It does not add value, it uncovers it. The beauty you see in those figurines now was always in the wood. In the carving, in the hours you spent, your fire, your human fire, the one that burns in your chest and makes you create things you know aren't good enough, put it there. My fire just made it visible. Marcus stared at the sleeping hatchlings, at the wooden dragons cradled against their hearts, at the faint, warm glow of transformed material that had been, hours ago, literally garbage. I don't understand, he whispered. You will, Valixara said, and there was something in her voice, something ancient and knowing and impossibly tender, that made him believe her. She settled her enormous head onto the stone, closing her eyes. One of the hatchlings, Valith, the first one, the curious one, shifted in its sleep, burrowed deeper into the pile, and murmured something that might have been a dream. The wooden dragon clutched in its claws glowed softly, steadily, like a small, warm star. Marcus walked back to the shuttle in a daze. The human crew was waiting for him, crowded around the entrance, faces full of questions and wonder, and a fragile, tentative pride that none of them quite knew what to do with. Tamaz Reyes grabbed his arm as he climbed aboard. Marcus, what the hell just happened? Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest seat. He looked at his hands. They were still trembling. There was a faint residue of synthetic wood dust on his fingertips. I have no idea, he said honestly. Priya stood at the front of the shuttle, arms crossed, that particular expression on her face that meant she was thinking very hard about something. The shuttle hummed as it lifted off, and through the small window, Marcus watched the cradle of flames recede, the black stone, the ember veins, the vast coiled shape of Valixara settling in around her sleeping young like a living fortress. Marcus, Priya said, how many did you make? 7, one for each hatchling. And you made them because… He was quiet for a long time. The shuttle climbed through Valorith's atmosphere, and the sky shifted from amber to deep purple to the black of space, stars blooming like frozen sparks. Because when I was 8 years old, he said, my grandmother made me a wooden rabbit with one ear longer than the other, and it was the best thing anyone ever gave me. Not because of what it was, because she made it for me. And I just wanted. His voice broke, he pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I wanted them to have that, he finished. Even if it didn't work, even if they didn't care, I wanted them to have it. The shuttle was quiet. Then Priya said very softly, they had it, Marcus, they had it. 3 days later, a message arrived at the human outpost. It was encoded in Dragonspeak, a language that humanity's translation systems had only begun to decode, and it took the communications team 6 hours to render it into standard. It was brief. To the human delegation of Valorith's fourth moon. Valith has named her figurine Marcus. She carries it everywhere. She shows it to her siblings. She chirps at it in the morning before she eats. She will not let anyone else touch it. This has never happened before. You are hereby granted permanent observer status at the Cradle of Flames. You may visit the hatchlings at any time. Bring more of your wooden dragons if you wish. Valith has requested one that looks like a rabbit with one long ear. She says Marcus has told her about it. I do not know how she knows this. Dragon hatchlings have their own ways of understanding things that are made with love. I have learned not to question it. With gratitude and fire. Valixara the ever-burning. Mother of the Crimson Scale. Guardian of Valorith. Friend of humanity. Marcus read the message 17 times. Then he sat down at the workbench in the fabrication shop, the tiny, cramped closet with the flickering light and the broken coffee machine, and he picked up a piece of synthetic wood. He picked up his file, and he began to carve a rabbit. Outside the outpost, on a moon that humans had no real right to be on, in a system that barely acknowledged their existence, the stars burned cold and ancient and indifferent. But inside the fabrication shop, something small and warm and stubbornly, irrationally, humanly alive was taking shape in a pair of shaking hands. And somewhere on the surface below, a baby dragon was sleeping with a wooden figurine clutched to her chest, dreaming of rabbits with one long ear, and purring a low, deep rumble that vibrated through the stone of a mountain that had been carved by gods. The figurine glowed softly in the dark. Worthless. Brushes. Theirs.